The theme today is spiritual experience with Dr. Marianne Rankin. Welcome, Marianne. Nice to see you again. And we start off with well, the welcome and a group alignment with a little bit of music. And then Marianne's going to give us the first talk about universality and the range of spiritual experience. And then, of course, we have our conscious conversations in breakout rooms. Then there'll be a short comfort break, and then we go into talk two, what we learn from near-death experiences, and another breakout session, and then a whole group session before we close up at 4:30 after our closing intention. So that's the plan for today. Although I'm going to hand over to Janice, who has known Marianne for many years, and over to you, Janice. Can you unmute, please?
Yeah, well, it's lovely to see you, Marianne. We've known each other for quite a long time, and I have my little story about it is one of my granddaughters was doing philosophy A level and was getting very stuck on what this all was about. And so I took her to see Marianne, and Marianne kindly gave her a copy of the book she's just showed you on spiritual and religious experiences. And she got an A.
Very good.
So you can see Marianne really does know what she's talking about. She's a lovely person. We live quite near and we often meet for coffee in a rather posh hotel, which is a great treat.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming, Marianne.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Good. Over to you.
Right. Well, thank you, Janice, and thanks for lovely introduction. I'm so pleased she got an A. Imagine if she got a D. Anyway, she didn't, so that's wonderful. Well, it's lovely to see you all here on screen, especially it's such a lovely day. You might actually wish you were doing something else, but it's lovely to see you, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak. So I thought I'd begin with a very short introduction to who I am. I've always been interested in liminal experiences at the edge of our existence, really. And so when I was quite young, I joined the Society for Psychical Research to explore the paranormal. And I was living abroad at the time in Singapore, in fact. And one day with the SPR's publications came a flyer from the Alistair Hardy Society. And I thought, well, who are these people? And what do they mean by spiritual experiences? And you can see it's taking me a long time, but I'm still exploring that. When I was living in Singapore, I was amazed at the number of different religions we were surrounded by. They all got on well. We all celebrated each other's festivals, tasted each other's delicacies. And it was a lovely multi-religious, multiracial, multicultural society. And when I came back to live in England, I was a bit sort of taken aback at the lack of variety in a lovely Cotswold village. But, you know, there wasn't the cultural mix that I'd got so used to in 20 years abroad. So I got involved in interfaith. I did a master's in the study of religion at Oxford, and I got more involved with the Alistair Hardy Society. I was their chair for 6 years, director of communications for over 10 years. And in that time, I gave talks to sixth forms in schools and to spiritual groups like yourselves. And I wrote the book that we looked at earlier. So to move on to spiritual experience, I would say that it's an experience which points beyond normal everyday life and which has a spiritual or religious significance for the person to whom it happens. Whatever form it takes, such an experience seems to give an indication of a greater reality which underlies the physical world of the senses. So I'm going to give you two examples just to illustrate what I'm talking about. Here's the first one. It seemed to me that in some way I was extending into my surroundings and was becoming one with them. At the same time, I felt a sense of lightness, exhilaration, and power, as if I was beginning to understand the true meaning of the whole universe. And another, I've had deeply troubled times in my life, including a broken marriage, and have certainly been uplifted and protected by a power to whom I can call upon during times of stress. Now, spiritual experiences occur with or without religious practice. They can be sudden, unexpected, and puzzling, or a gentle recognition that things need to change in one's life. Various surveys have shown that between half and a third of the populace feel they've had some kind of experience of spiritual significance. I mean, one way of looking at the different religious traditions is to consider the revelatory experiences of the founders or mediators of the divine to humanity. These were men, almost all, who had profound experiences of the divine. They led lives which were so impressive, and they gave such wise teachings that they gained followers in their lifetime. Then after their death, their teachings were written down, practices which they had advocated were followed, rituals enacted, and the religious tradition was established in their memory. As we've seen, it's so often then that the human dynamics take over, blurring the original vision. But the teachings are preserved in this way and can always be found by those who are true seekers. Many saints, mystics, and devotees have also left wonderful writings and inspired others to the religious life. Now, the different religious traditions may be considered as various paths up the mountain, compatible but varied approaches to the same ultimate reality. And the teachings of the mystics urge us to look beyond individual revelations, to focus on the moon, not the finger pointing to it. So I'm now going to speak a little bit about Sir Alister Hardy and his research and the establishment of a research centre in Oxford. Alister Hardy was a mainstream scientist. He was knighted for his services to marine biology, and eventually he became Linacre Professor of Zoology at Oxford, where interestingly he taught Richard Dawkins. Now, Hardy thought of humans as spiritual animals and religious experience as a natural phenomenon of evolutionary value. He felt that in exploring their environment, humans had become aware of something beyond it, a transcendent presence, which met them in a different way from their everyday experience. In other words, he believed that spirituality was a natural part of consciousness. In order to prove his theory, on his retirement from Oxford, he devoted himself to studying the spiritual experiences of ordinary people. So not clerics or academics, just ordinary people. It was in 1925 that Hardy first became aware of accounts of spiritual experience in the press, and he began a collection of accounts using a press agency. He collected experiences related to the spiritual side of life, but not to formal religion. He then placed adverts in the religious press, but met with a disappointing lack of response. Then he put an advert in the ordinary secular press, The Guardian, Observer, Times, and Daily Mail. And there, after a short article or example of a spiritual experience, he posed what is now known as the Hardy question. Have you ever been aware of or influenced by a presence or power, whether you call it God or not, which is different from your everyday self? Well, I wonder what your answer would be, and I suggest this as a topic for the breakout groups. I've posed it to spiritual groups where every hand went up, and to sixth formers, asking them to close their eyes and then put their hands up to avoid shyness and shifty looks around the classroom. Well, there was an overwhelming response to Hardy's appeal. Readers sent accounts of experiences they'd never dared share with anyone before for fear of being thought abnormal. And this gave Hardy the data to set up a research centre in Manchester College, Oxford. And that was the beginning of what is now the Religious Experience Research Centre, RERC, archive. The results of Hardy's research and analysis of the first 3,000 accounts were published in The Spiritual Nature of Man in 1979. And there, Hardy defined spiritual experience as a deep awareness of a benevolent, non-physical power, which appears to be partly or wholly beyond and far greater than the individual self. As a result of his appeal, Hardy received a wide range of accounts. They included intense responses to nature, music, art, or religious worship. Many told of alleviation of depression, of help in overcoming addiction, or answers to desperate prayers asking for help. There were experiences of light, visions, voices, a sense of comfort or love in times of distress, or guidance in life. All seem to indicate another dimension, a spiritual reality. Our research centre still receives accounts from people sent in from all over the world. And nowadays, many experiences are related to death, end of life, near-death experiences, or NDEs, and after-death communication. These are frequently transformative and also seem to indicate the possibility of survival of death. And we're going to look at those in my second talk. So now I want to move on to global research, because as Hardy considered spiritual experience to be a natural human trait, he assumed that it would be universal. He hoped that research would be undertaken worldwide, and indeed, in later years, the Alistair Hardy Trust led research in China, Taiwan, Turkey, and India. The Hardy question continues to be used, but it's often rephrased to accommodate different cultural understandings. Terminology used in the questionnaires reflects the religious understanding of the country which is being studied. So China. Now, although officially atheist since 1949, since about 1980, religion has once again been tolerated. Research was undertaken by two RERC professors beginning in 2004 with a survey of the Han Chinese. And with the help of 110 Chinese researchers, they collected 3,196 questionnaires, each 24 pages long, on many aspects of Chinese religious experience and belief, as well as conducting in-depth interviews. Now, the equivalent of the Hardy question was posed, followed by a list of suggestions, such as the power of the Lord of Heaven, the Tao, Qi, or Buddha. Now, although China has a history which includes three major traditions, Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, the Chinese do not follow one spiritual path to the exclusion of others, but are quite happy to pray to different gods or take on part in various rituals according to the situation. The traditions have become so intertwined that alters to representatives of all three at once are not at all uncommon. Now, in the survey that the professors did, they found that when initially asked if they were religious, only about 8% thought so. However, the researchers found an astonishing response to the question about experiencing the influence or control of spiritual powers. Almost half of the respondents claimed to have experienced the god of fortune, about a quarter of them the will of heaven, and about a fifth their ancestors. More specific experiences had lesser percentages. About 18% the Buddha, 6% had had experiences of the Christian God, but 5% had encountered spirits or ghosts, and about 4% the Tao or Qi. Now, if one were simply to add these up, one would get an impossible figure of 127%. But this was because most Chinese have had experiences of more than one spiritual power. So the response in China to the Hardy question about experiencing a power or presence different from everyday life led to a result of 57%. So overall, the results from China indicate levels of spiritual experience very much in line with that in the West. So despite suppression, religion had not died out, and the basic human response to another dimension had survived. Then Taiwan. Now, the Alistair Hardy Trust did not itself run research in Taiwan, but its methods directly inspired one of the largest non-Western studies of religious experience in the modern world. There were a couple of conferences reflecting the research, including one in Taipei, in which I participated in 2010. One of the distinctive features of Taiwan is its highly plural religious culture, where individuals often hold multiple religious identities. People may follow any one or a mix of Buddhism, Taoism, folk religion, and ancestor veneration. So experiences there were less tied to formal doctrine and more integrated into everyday life. And the research confirmed similarities with Hardy's findings, a widespread occurrence of spiritual experience and the transformative effect on individuals. The findings supported Hardy's hypothesis that religious experience is cross-cultural and likely to be universal. A research project was undertaken in Turkey, which is a predominantly Muslim country, although officially it's a secular state. A professor in the University of Istanbul collected 1,236 questionnaires, which included 36 questions. He reported his findings in a paper given at the British Association for the Study of Religions conference in 2006. He took the classical Hardy question and other similar questions into consideration, and he transformed them into the most easily understandable and culturally appropriate form of question. So his first question was, have you ever had an extraordinary, exceptional, or supranormal experience which you would qualify as religious or spiritual? And he found that about 20% answered, perhaps, but not sure. So they weren't quite sure what it was that he was trying to get at. But he found that once the substance of the question had been clarified with the use of examples, then the following result was obtained. About 64% answered yes and 37% no. So he explored the varieties of religious experiences and found that receiving God's help in answer to prayer to be the most widely reported. Also, an awareness of the presence of Allah and his guidance, but also an awareness of his punishment. Now, India. A religious experience study project was set up in Tamil Nadu, South India. Interviews were conducted at random for people of all religious backgrounds and none. A total of 206 case studies were carried out, and from this it was estimated that about 68% of the people interviewed had what could be regarded as a valid religious experience. Also, he asked whether they belonged to different religious traditions. And he found actually that 79% would see themselves as religious, which is a very high figure. But for those who know that part of southern India, it's not a surprise. The results further indicated that belonging to a religious tradition increased the chances of people having a religious experience. And the most common type was for Hindus, a sense of power, for Christians and Muslims, miraculous answers to prayer. Now, in all, the global project resulted in a fascinating insight into the universality of spiritual experience and the variety encountered, whether or not linked to spiritual traditions, religious traditions. So in your breakup groups, I wondered if you might like to consider the Hardy question. You might share some of your own experiences. You might want to look at the question itself and think, well, I don't know about that. I would phrase it differently. And you might also want to talk about what your response is to the whole subject so far. Okay.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Plenty to think about there, and I'm sure it's sparked off quite a few thoughts and reminiscences from all of us. Plenty to share, I think, with each other. So the question again is, have you ever been aware of or influenced by a presence or power, whether you call it God or not, which is different from your everyday self? So we're going to go into breakout rooms to just discuss around that, and we'll be in the breakout rooms until about 25 past 3. So plenty of time to just explore that question about religious experience. So Bill, over to you to put us into breakout rooms. But it is time to have our second talk from Marianne, and this is about what we learn from near-death experiences. So Marianne, once again, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you. So what we can learn from near-death experiences. I'll begin by giving you the pattern of a near-death experience, or NDE, and I'm sorry for those who know it all, but it's better if we all hear it stated. So an NDE takes place when the individual is clinically dead, but has a coherent experience before being revived. An NDE can occur during an accident, cardiac arrest, during an operation, or in times of massive stress. And a typical NDE begins with an out-of-body experience, or OBE, viewing one's own body from above, seeing and hearing what's going on, but being unable to communicate. Realization that one has died is followed by entry into a dark tunnel with a bright, welcoming light at the end. And there, the person seems to be met by a being of light and love, and often deceased relatives as well, As the person does not, in fact, die, it's often at this point that it's made clear that the time is not yet ripe, and a return to the body takes place, often against the person's will, and occasionally into pain. Some people, however, go on to experience a life review, where they themselves feel the suffering they have caused others, judging themselves and their behavior. On a more positive note, apparently one also feels the joy that one has given, which is a bit of a relief, but it's quite a wake-up call nonetheless, feeling what you have made others feel. And on their return to life on Earth, these people frequently live completely transformed lives. The NDE leads them to greater compassion for their fellows and a more spiritual, less materialistic attitude. Many change to more caring professions. Some become religious, but almost all report that they no longer have any fear of death. A friend of mine had an NDE 6 years ago, in which she left her hospital bed in the resuscitation unit and found herself in the most beautiful countryside. She described feeling free as the air, light, young, and in her prime. And she saw her beloved mother, also in her prime, across a road which blocked her path. She saw other relatives too, before she suddenly returned to her hospital bed. She says that that joyous feeling of freedom, lightness in weight, and the surrounding radiant light and beauty was almost beyond words. And she's convinced that we have nothing to fear. Carl Jung experienced an NDE during a heart attack he suffered in 1944. And he wrote, "What happens after death is so unspeakably glorious that our imagination and our feelings do not suffice to form even an approximate conception of it." Now, NDEs are not merely a modern phenomenon. There are myths in different parts of the world and reports across the centuries which have a similar pattern, including Plato's account of in the Republic. However, these days, there's an increasing amount of reporting, recording, and analysis of NDEs, and they're no longer seen as something one doesn't mention. They're discussed openly and are frequently the subject of articles in the media. But it was Raymond Moody who first brought the subject to public attention with his book Life After Life, which was published in 1975. It was he who coined the term near-death experience. Moody was a physician and a philosopher, and he studied 150 cases for that groundbreaking book. These were instances of people who had clinically died, but who nonetheless had coherent experiences before being resuscitated, which was considered impossible by the medical profession. It's estimated that between 12 and 20% of patients who are revived after being clinically dead report an NDE. And since then, a number of studies have been undertaken, recording the most common features of the experience. Our Religious Experience Research Center received accounts of NDEs before the term was known, and we continue to receive them. Now, here's an example actually taken from Moody's book. "I suppose this experience molded something in my life. I was only a child when it happened, only 10. But now my entire life through, I am thoroughly convinced that there's life after death, without a shadow of a doubt. And I'm not afraid to die. I'm not. Some people I've known are so afraid, so scared. I always smile to myself when I hear people doubt that there's an afterlife, or say, when you're dead, you're gone. I think to myself, they really don't know. Now, groundbreaking research was undertaken some years ago by Dr. Pim van Lommel in Holland. He was a practicing cardiologist, and he led a 13-year prospective study of 344 cardiac arrest patients in 10 hospitals, of whom 41 reported NDEs. The results were published in the prestigious English medical journal, The Lancet, in 2001. And this was a major breakthrough in the admission by scientists and the medical profession that NDEs were real, not hallucinations, not linked to drugs or medication, nor the result of anoxia. And Pim van Lommel's results revealed that about 50% of people who had NDEs became aware that they had died. 56% had positive emotions. 32% met with deceased persons. 31% moved through a tunnel. And 29% had an observation of celestial landscape, rather like my friend. OBEs occurred in 24%, communication with the light 23%, and observation of colors also 23% of them. 13% had a life review, but only 8% actually went as far as finding a border. Now, Pim van Lommel has now given up cardiology to study consciousness. He considers that the brain does not produce consciousness, which would entail that on death, consciousness would cease. He believes that the brain operates like a transmitter of an underlying primary non-local consciousness, which exists apart from the body. He uses the analogy of a TV, which doesn't create the program, but receives and transmits it. And that interpretation would allow for the survival of consciousness beyond physical death. Now, in recent years, there have been many studies of NDEs by Peter and Elizabeth Fenwick, Bruce Grayson, Sam Pania, Mark Fox, and Penny Sartori, among others. And the International Association for Near-Death Studies, IANDS, was founded in 1981 by leading researchers to provide information and education about NDEs and to offer support to those who've had them. There are also some fascinating accounts of people's experiences to explore, such as Eben Alexander's Proof of Heaven, a neurosurgeon's journey into the afterlife, where he recounts what happened to him during his week-long coma and what he learnt from it. He too changed from being a reductive materialist scientist, believing that the brain produced consciousness and that this life is all there is, to viewing the brain as a transceiver and life itself as far more rich and complex than we can imagine. Most NDEs are positive, but there are also accounts of terrifying experiences, although in many cases the person travels through the darkness into light, and the initial fear is transcended. Here's an example. Dr. Rajiv Bharti was chief of anesthesiology at the Bakersfield Heart Hospital in California. He wrote about his NDE in a book entitled Dying to Wake Up, A Doctor's Voyage into the Afterlife and the Wisdom He Brought Back. It was published in 2016. In the book, he describes an initial OBE, watching his body being operated on. But he then tells of finding himself in a dark, frightening environment, which he later interpreted as reflecting his own moral and emotional state at the time. He was accompanied by his deceased father through previous lives and gained an understanding of a pattern of violence in his family through the generations. He recounts experiencing a panoramic review of his life, particularly moments where he had acted selfishly, neglected compassion, and pursued wealth over service. He also described feeling the emotional impact of his actions on others. But then he reports encountering a radiant, loving presence, characterized by unconditional love, understanding, and acceptance. And he says that the experience led to a radical change in values, reduced materialism, greater spiritual commitment, more compassion in medical practice, and an interest in interfaith spirituality. Dr. Pati changed his life completely as a result of his NDE. He resigned his lucrative post and he sold his large mansion and luxury cars, replacing them with a more modest lifestyle. Most important of all, he repaired his relationships with his family, in particular with his son, having understood the pattern of being demanding and the abuse seen in his father and repeated in his own mistreatment of his son. Black Elk, a holy man of the Oglala Sioux tribe of North America, had gained healing powers and foresight through an extremely complex NDE at the age of 9, when he was unconscious for 12 days. It was 8 years before he was able to come to terms with the experience, and then only with the help of a medicine man. In his NDE, Black Elk was taken to 6 grandfathers, each of whom gave him particular powers. Age 26, Black Elk had another NDE while in Europe with Buffalo Bill's traveling show. He fell ill and was presumed dead. In fact, he felt that he was traveling on a cloud to see his family back in South Dakota. He subsequently went back and saw everything exactly as in the vision. And he learned that his mother had dreamt of him visiting on a cloud at exactly that time. Now, in general, on their return to life on Earth, people who've had NDEs frequently live completely transformed lives. The experience leads them to a more spiritual, less materialistic attitude, with greater compassion for their fellows, and many change to more caring professions. NDEs have opened a window on eternity, given us a new perspective on life and death, and a hopeful one at that. There are accounts of pain being transformed into bliss, the darkness of a tunnel leading to loving light, meetings with deceased loved ones whom we thought gone forever, an overview of and reflection on our lives here on Earth, ending with a return to the body, but now with an awareness of realms beyond this world. It's no wonder that people are never the same after an NDE. But what do you think would happen if a seasoned skeptical philosopher had an NDE? Well, it happened. The atheist philosopher A.J. Ayer, who held that religious claims were meaningless because they were not empirically verifiable, he had an NDE in old age. He saw a red light, which seemed to him to be responsible for the government of the universe. His first response was to think that on the face of it, these experiences are rather strong evidence that death does not put an end to consciousness. However, after rehearsing some of the philosophical problems associated with life after death, his conclusion was more modest, namely that my recent experiences have slightly weakened my conviction that my genuine death, which is due fairly soon, will be the end of me, though I continue to hope it will. He also added that the experience had not weakened his conviction that there is no God. So clearly, the NDE does not have a spiritually transforming effect in every case. So in conclusion, NDEs offer a deeper perspective on life and give people hope of life after death. They don't seem to lead to any specific religion, but to a deeper spiritual awareness and heightened moral principles. Most importantly, however, they're often the cause of a change in attitudes and ways of life. So I thought maybe in the breakout groups, you might like to think about how does hearing about NDEs help us to reflect on the continuity of life now and in the hereafter? Or maybe some of you have had NDEs and you like to share them. But what do you think we can learn from all these stories?
Nope. Well, thank you once again, Marianne, for really interesting all the different aspects of this.
Yeah.
I'm going to share that question just so that it can stick in people's memories a little bit. How does hearing about NDEs help us reflect on the continuity of life here now and hereafter? And of course, if anybody, as Marianne said, has actually had one, it would be great if they could share it. But of course, no
obligation.
You don't need to. It's entirely up to yourselves. So once more, we're going to go into breakout rooms until 4:15. So thanks, Bill.
Right.
And I'm sure you've had some very rich and meaningful discussions. Now we have a kind of 10 minutes really for any particular thoughts or questions that you may have to Marianne, if anybody would like to do that. I think, Bill, if you put us back into the view where we can see everybody, then if everybody waves their hand, I think we can see them. So would anybody like to ask or make a comment or?
Or share their own experience of a near-death experience.
Yeah, share an experience. Don't all be shy. June. Yes.
We ended up talking about how in some cultures there wouldn't be a distinction between a spiritual experience and ordinary experience, because all of the world would be filled with the spiritual. And they'd be completely aware of the presence of the ancestors and the angels and the spirits all the time. That, what we're looking at is a particular cultural phenomenon in the West, the way that secularization worked. And one of the sad things of the COVID thing that I heard, that I think it was a person who'd been in a coma, and he was asked what it felt like, and he said he was in a boat with Jesus, and Jesus held on to him through it all. And then when it came back into the Today program, Nick Robinson said, well, these drugs do funny things. So it was dismissed. And we have a culture which tends to dismiss it, and therefore we have a division. But if we were practitioners in the Micmac people that I stayed with, nobody would be surprised at that sort of experience. It would much be that, in effect, what we have is a culture which creates a division, which isn't there in particularly indigenous religions. Could you make some comments on that, Marianne?
Marianne, you're muted.
Right. Sorry. No, I completely agree. I think we're often very limited, especially if we haven't traveled, we haven't researched, we haven't asked questions. People think they know it all in the West, and their little bubble seems to reinforce that. And I think you're completely right to go out. I used the example of black elk really to open up what I was talking about, so that I didn't stop with Western sort of research or percentages and things, because I'm sure in his culture, it was much more accepted. And yeah, I mean, when I lived in Singapore, I was surrounded by all these religions. People, it was just more part of everyday life. And it wasn't really questioned, or there weren't the skeptical responses there. You didn't see it as something odd. You just accepted, right, that's where they're coming from. Well, they're Hindus, so, well, that's fine for them. And the Muslims would see it differently. And we would just deal with life and death and illness and bereavement from wherever we were coming from, but often without referring to the religious background at all. We're just dealing on a deeper level all the time, which I really did find very inspiring in a way. What led to me, when I came back here, to follow up different religions, different cultures, because I found people here thought they knew it all, and it was a very limited palette that they were operating from. So thank you, June. Yes. Yeah.
Any others? Janet, you're muted. Could you unmute yourself?
I can chip in from experience in India, when Marianne saying was the case there in the 1980s. Spirituality was a normal part of life, But I'm a bit apprehensive that materialism and consumerism and Western ideas have now crept in. And I'm not sure. I haven't been to India for a long time, but I'm not sure if it's the same now.
Yeah. They can all meet on the materialistic level very easily, can't they? It's not. It's less demanding. Yeah.
I think Janet Lake had a question. So, Janet, over to you.
Yes, I had difficulty with the definition that you gave of a near-death experience, because I thought it was too limited.
Right.
I don't think everyone experiences going down a tunnel.
Oh, no, they don't. No.
All I know is that for a long time, I couldn't believe that I'd actually had a near-death experience. When I had, it was actually meeting Anita Morjani.
Yes.
Who's written the book Dying to Live. And then I realized it from how that affected her afterwards. I realized I knew I was able then to be able to affirm my own experience. But because I hadn't had the tunnel thing, and I'm just wanting to say that because I think it's much wider than that.
Absolutely. And I think the percentages I gave, only 30% had a tunnel experience. What I did really was to report the research that Pim van Lommel did, and his percentages of who'd had a tunnel or whatever. Some people have, just like you, said, well, I didn't go down a tunnel. And my friend, who was left her bed in the resuscitation unit, there was no tunnel. She suddenly was in beautiful landscape, saw her mother. What there was a border. So what I put forward really as a definition wasn't a finite definition. It was, I brought together different aspects of the NDE, and not everybody has them all. Some of them have them in different order. And as I was saying, my friend who definitely had, a near-death experience didn't have a tunnel at all either. And I've read people saying, just like you, well, I didn't have a tunnel, or I didn't have this, I didn't have that. No, not everybody has everything. But what people do all agree on is that, right, they were clinically dead, or they had died, but their brain didn't stop. The brain might have stopped, but their consciousness, their awareness was still there.
Can I just raise that point? Because I don't think I was ever aware of having actually died.
Right.
I knew I was dying.
Yes.
I definitely knew I was dying, but I hadn't actually died. But one thing I think is amazing from it, it took away completely my fear of death.
Yes.
And for that, I'm enormously grateful.
Well, I think that's a wonderful thing for you to share with us all. I know that Peter and Elizabeth Fenwick, their book, they said there were all sorts of different results that in people's lives after their near-death experiences, or their awareness after dying or nearly dying. And they said, but the one thing that nearly everybody agreed on, tunnel or not, was that they were then no longer afraid of death. They realized, right, our way of seeing things has not given us an accurate picture of what actually is then going to happen to us. So wonderful, as you say, and the example I read you of a 9-year-old girl, there was no mention of a tunnel in there either, but she just said, well, I'm not afraid to die, I'm just not. Which I thought, how wonderful from the age of 9 not to be afraid of death, because most of us are, at some stage. So I like that. I like that example, which was in Raymond Moody's book. So yeah, but thank you for that.
Thanks, Marianne. I think one last time for one last comment from Barbara.
Could I just mention Dan Brown's latest book?
Yes.
It starts off with one of the characters flying over Prague, and you think it's a near-death experience, but actually it's an actual death experience. It's called Secrets of Secrets, and it's all about consciousness. I'm halfway through it at the moment, so I do recommend that as an interesting. It does mention near-death experiences.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. So interesting that Pim van Lommel has given up cardiology to study consciousness. Because our understanding of who we are, what we are, needs to change, I think.
Can I also say that somebody in our group asked for the names of the books mentioned. So, Marianne, if you can send them all to Bill, all the books you've mentioned, and he will circulate it to
it's coming.
I'll do that, Bill, if that's okay. By email.
Can I just also add, I do think also these, what you call near-death experiences, can also happen in life, as I've had several where I haven't been dying, so I think that can happen in life as well as near-death.
Yeah, I mentioned right at the beginning stress as well. Huge stress. You weren't stressed?
No.
Was it a pleasant experience then?
Wonderful.
How marvellous.
Wonderful, yeah. Out of body stuff as well, so, but it wasn't stress, no.
Right.
But it has changed my whole life, and again, taken away fear of death.
Wonderful. Isn't that, a wonderful final thought, in a way, to leave us with this afternoon?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gabrielle.
Similar for different for everybody.
Yeah. But the fear of death stopping, there being no longer a fear of death seems to be the most common denominator, if you like, of all of this.
Well, thank you, everybody. Yes. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions, both in the breakout groups and just now. I think it is time for us to come to an end. To say, first of all, a very big thank you to Marianne for such fascinating input. Thank you, Marianne, for a really good, just a review of near-death experiences and the universality of religious experience. Fascinating stuff. And I hope we can all go out and buy your book.
Yes, please do. Please do. It's very expensive on Amazon. It's about £40.
Oh God.
40 quid.
I sell them at 30 and I barely make on that.
Yeah.
The publishers are quite mean.
Yeah. Oh well, there we are. Such is life, isn't it?
It is.
So I'm going to hand over to Jane now for our closing intention, which I'm also going to bring up on the screen so that we can see what it is. So Jane, over to you.
Thank you, Don. Yes, we've been talking about consciousness survives death, but another aspect of consciousness is that as we're all here together, we can develop a group consciousness. And so we always do this at the end of each of our CCCs to take an intention, because there's scientific evidence that if we all hold these together for a few minutes, it actually makes a difference. So this is our intention for today. May awareness of the spiritual dimension within everyday life become more widespread and normalized. So if we just hold that on as a belief, a prayer, an intention together for a couple of minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just to hand back over to Barbara, who is going to blow out our candle and say a few words. Thank you, Barbara.
May the energy of love, light, and peace be sent out into the world, that humanity may awaken to its divine source and center and live by that love and unity.
Lovely. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
One final thing just to say is that we have coming up our Cana online sacred space, or COS as we call it, for Lunar South. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
That's on Wednesday 29th July, 10:30 to 11:30.
That's 11.
Oh yes, 11 till 12, isn't it?
Yeah,
sorry, 11 till 12.
Awakening consciousness.
Bill will be sending something out about that. Yeah. And our next conscious conversations, we've managed to get David Lorimer from the Scientific and Medical Network, Awakening Consciousness in Our Time, and that is on the 28th of November, definitely the 28th. So that's great. We're looking forward to that and looking forward to seeing many of you again. And again, thank you to Marianne. All we need to say now is bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.